Our group looked into consumer policy issues surrounding daily fantasy sports.
Daily fantasy sports is an industry that is growing exponentially, and the two main websites are DraftKings and FanDuel. Daily fantasy sports is when the user is able to pick a team of players in a sport and hope their play transfers into good fantasy play. Fantasy sports assign certain point values to stats during the player's game. Fantasy sports is a huge industry, and in 2015 there were 56.8 million people playing fantasy sports and on average spent $257 throughout the year. The difference between normal fantasy sports and daily fantasy sports is the user can change their team every day instead of having to stick with the same team throughout the season, giving the user an opportunity to participate in more events. Users in daily fantasy sports pick a tournament they want to join by paying an entry fee they choose and then compete against other users of that website in that tournament to win money. Elias Research estimates that daily fantasy sports industry to have annual revenue of $2.5 billion each year by 2020, as well as $30 billion in entry fees compared to the $1 billion in entry fees in 2014. By collecting all of this money, the websites are able to place many advertisements on TV and the internet, sometimes making their games sound a lot easier to win, as well as higher payouts.
There are several major issues surrounding the concept of daily fantasy sports. First and foremost, there are debates regarding if it should be categorized as gambling or a game of skill. It can be considered gambling since the participant is placing wagers on an uncertain outcome. Others argue, however, that choosing the players who will perform the best each day takes skill. Next, there is a lack of consumer regulation. The 2006 Unlawful Internet Gambling Act specifically excluded this industry from any government regulation due to the fact that the future outcome and size of these sorts of sites were not yet defined or known. Because of this lack of regulation, there is information asymmetry between employees of the sites and their participants. Employees have access to the most popular and least popular players and are able to bet using these odds of payouts on competing sites. In recent news, a DraftKings employee who was not able to bet on his employer's site was under scrutiny for possibly taking the betting statistics from DraftKings and using them to make a better informed decision on FanDuel to win $350,000 in a single contest. Beyond that, the commercials used cause a negative externality by advertising the large sums of money that can be won, but these earnings may not be feasible to the average consumer. Due to these recent controversies, the government is looking into ways that it could better regulate this industry in order to better protect consumers and ensure that the winnings are being taxed appropriately and receiving adequate tax revenue.
With all of the negative externalities that accompany gambling, lost income, lost jobs, unpaid liabilities, you may wonder, since most states have outlawed sports gambling, why don't we just outlaw online sports gambling as well? Maybe that's not such a good idea either. Our country bans stuff a lot, which means we have a whole bunch of data about how well that tends to work out for us. It doesn't, work. In regards to online gambling, we have very specific data to prove this. We mentioned that the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act of 2006. The UIGE's intention was to stop online poker and gambling sites from operating in the United States. Those same sites moved to Antigua and then filed suit against the United States in 2007 for hindering Antiguan companies' ability to do business internationally. The United States lost that court fight, and we were ordered to pay restitution that was rumored to have been in the billions of dollars. It's still only a rumor because the Bush administration declared the outcome of that lawsuit to be a matter of national security, and the online poker sites didn't wither on the vine. Even if you take the most modest word of some of the crusaders who created the UIGE, online poker still makes billions of dollars around the world, and a huge chunk of that still comes from the United States. So here we are, still with the negative externalities of online poker, and a huge bill for our effort. Prohibition is clearly not the answer.
Instead of banning these activities altogether, our recommendation is that these leagues should be connected to policies currently in practice at casinos, regulated at a state level and then projected to a federal level. By doing this, fantasy draft leagues can set limits on the weekly wagers by site users, as well as set a number on total entrants. They would also be able to restrict employee participants in markets in which they have an asymmetrical information advantage. There are many benefits to this option, including the deterrence of underage gambling and reducing compulsive gambling. We believe this is the most realistic and feasible policy initiative in order to address the issues surrounding daily fantasy sports.